guys, welcome to Brian's Man Cave. So today I'm just doing a video talking about the Atari in 2020. This is kind of like a what if or can you imagine type of idea. And what kind of started this was during my interview with Dan Kitchen, who is a former Activision programmer during the Atari days, during the early Atari days of the 2600, who programmed things like Crackpots and Ghostbusters on the Atari 2600. We were having a discussion about, Atari in today, and that, they still make homebrews, and he's still programming. In fact, we were talking about his game Gold Rush, which is a sequel, or sort of a sequel to the game Keystone Capers, which was on the 2600 that his brother did. And his the one thing that he said that kind of stuck out at me was, he could kind of imagine if they just created an Atari, a brand new Atari, with the original guts, essentially, an actual Atari 2600, kind of a small casing, package it up, get it on the shelves at Walmart, places like that sell these things, and it would open up the doors for him to actually be able to sell properly brand new games for the Atari and introduce it to a whole new audience. Now, this isn't a new thing, because the Atari 2600, it came out in like 77, I believe its official release date was, and, known as the VCS, and then it was pretty successful throughout the years, and then it kind of made a resurgence when they actually made the Atari 2600 Junior, as it's well known as, in around 86. So they kind of already went through this. Other systems were out, the Nintendo was out, and they thought, hey, we can kind of bring this back as a cheaper alternative to video game systems, and there's still a market out there for people who enjoy playing the games. And I do remember that. I remember that when this thing came out, and I remember seeing the games everywhere on the shelves, and it was pretty cool. But we're talking about a time in 85 when Nintendo was out, and we were still buying cartridge-based games. And so, we kind of went away from that when we started getting into like the PlayStation and stuff like that, where it was all CD based. And now we're getting into a time where they're not even having CDs anymore. Everything's just going to be download only. So things have changed throughout the years. But what hasn't changed is that people still love this retro stuff. They still want to have Atari stuff. They still want to have the. Now there's probably a niche market. It's not going to be a huge market. But I mean, if you think about things like the Flashback, this thing came out a few years ago, several years ago. I remember seeing it on the shelves, the original one when it came out, and we're up to about, at the time I'm filming this, we're up to about 10, I believe, is the current one. So people are still kind of interested, and they have the original look and feel. They even have the joysticks. Some people actually do enjoy these kind of joysticks a little bit better than, say, using a gamepad. But regardless, I mean, so there is somewhat of a market. Now, the thing is, things like Hyperkin, just like this thing, the Flashback, they created a kind of a little Atari that could run cartridges. But the problem is, it was actually it's more of an emulation device, and a lot of us have emulators. We have emulation devices all over the place, and they're pretty cheap. They're dime a dozen type of things, but it's not the same. It's kind of like when you take your Nintendo Wii and you just kind of put emulation on it, and then you start playing your Atari games on there. Sort of, gets the feel of playing Atari, but it's not the same. You can't buy brand new homebrews that are just being produced today and have it play on your Wii. Now the Hyperkin does work, and it had mixed reviews. There was a lot of people who liked it. There was a lot of people that hated it. There was a lot of hardware, software issues. The thing had like a firmware. So his concept, or Dan Kitchen's concept, was bring back the original Atari, just like they did with this in '86. Bring out an alternative, Atari that actually is still branded Atari. And they had opportunities, I guess, to do this again, but I'm sure there's reasons for it. I mean, there's, you got to think of money. Money is the big issue. Building hardware like this, what is it going to cost? And I'm sure the parts for this weren't really that expensive. Well, in today's day, to reproduce something like this, and to actually be able to have Atari games that could be sold. So building this kind of hardware is definitely a lot more expensive than, say, just putting out a downloadable game that you can just download. Even the CDs are a lot cheaper. But there was something missing about those. There's something missing about the whole, the whole hardware aspect of it. And I know I've talked about this before on my channel because I love the hardware part. I love these things. And of course, you're probably thinking, well, you got an Atari right there. I mean, you can just buy an Atari. You can find one in a flea market. And that is true. There's tons of the old Ataris still lying around. But, these are like going on 20, 30 years now. So hardware in these things are starting to fail. And you do have another problem here in that these are all the RF switch things where you have to plug it in to the RF cable, unless you can get it modded, which some people do. But we're talking about now getting into skilled areas where a lot of people don't want to touch. People don't want to buy something like this secondhand and then have to find somebody who can get in there, modify it, put in an HDMI thing, and have it able to hook up to your modern day TV. So obviously that's a problem. So what I would think this new Atari would be able to do, that he was just kind of mentioning, is that it would be the original classic Atari with all its original guts, but have the HDMI out to go into a TV. I don't know how technical that is and how hard that would be. It's just the thought that would be kind of cool. And of course it would be able to run all the original games because it's the original hardware. There's no firmware, there's no updates, there's no, you got to plug it in, you got to download software, all that kind of stuff. And of course, like the original Atari, from what I've heard anyways, the original Atari, the one that came out in the 70s, originally was going to have a game built into it. And I believe there was a slot available, which was going to have combat, I think it was. You can kind of still hardwire in a chip that maybe has 100 of the original Atari games that are, they have the patents for or whatever they're able to actually license out. And this is something that I'm thinking would have been probably a good idea, as to oppose of what is being proposed today with the whole Atari VCS, which we've heard on the news, we've read the feeds, we've seen the YouTubers talking about it. It's a big mess. It's got a Kickstarter or whatever. It's got a backup, and people have put a lot of money into this thing. Nobody knows what it's going to do. And frankly, are those people really the ones who are interested in brand new hardware that's going to run brand new games? Or are these people like me who are into the retro, who want to, experience the original stuff, who want to not just experience the original stuff, but try something different, try something new on the old stuff, and still have that 2D feel, the original games, and frankly, I mean, back then, these things cost a lot of money to produce. Of course, they purposely used smaller chips just to make sure that they could save money, and so there was a lot of limitations to the programming on these games. Whereas today, I don't think that would be the issue. You'd be able to produce 36-bit carts or whatever, four or five times the slot that this would have held. So it's just kind of like a question I was just kind of thinking about in my mind. It would be kind of cool that if we could reproduce this and bring back an Atari, an actual Atari that has all its guts, has everything that it's supposed to have, has an original controller, not the newer ones that are a little bit more flimsy, but actually original hard controller, and put it on the shelves and have an audience. Now I know you're all thinking it won't happen because it's just money. It all comes down to money. But it would be cool if somebody could actually do that. I mean, the Hyperkin was a good chance at it, but it's not the same. It's not the hardware. It's emulation. So it would be cool if something like that could actually come about. So I'd like to know what your thoughts are. Would you actually think that something like that could happen? Could we go back into the cartridge days, and would people actually buy them? Because I've heard stories, I've heard people say things like, what are people collecting nowadays when it comes to video games? In most cases, you're collecting an empty case that you could put your, your download code in or something. But the physical aspect is gone. Anyways, yeah, I just wanted to talk about that. It was just something that was rattling around in my head, when we were talking, and I thought that would be cool if Atari could come back in some small way. Anyways, hope you liked the video. Throw some comments down below. Let me know if you think that this is a crazy idea, it'll never happen, or if you would be totally on board if some company came out and said, hey, we're going to do it, or it maybe even if the actual Atari company that's around today, that's going to put out that VCS, if they were to change their mind and say, forget it, we're going to put out an original Atari and see what people do. Anyways, hope you liked the video, hope you subscribe, talk to you later.